Chapter 1, Quiet Excellence as a Foundation for Ethical Leadership. Abstract. This chapter presents quiet excellence as a rigorous, interdisciplinary foundation for ethical leadership in contemporary social, organizational, and technological contexts. Quiet excellence is theorized as an embodied, lawful, and nonviolent form of authority grounded in nervous system regulation, moral reasoning, and democratic legal restraint. Departing from charisma-centered and performance-driven leadership paradigms, the chapter reframes leadership as a regulated moral practice whose primary ethical obligation is harm prevention, dignity preservation, and the long-term stabilization of human systems. Drawing on leadership ethics, trauma-informed neuroscience, contemplative scholarship, and public interest law, this chapter establishes the conceptual architecture for the book and positions quiet excellence as a scholarly, civic, and globally relevant contribution. Keywords: quiet excellence, ethical leadership, trauma-informed governance, presence, nonviolence, lawful authority. 1.1 Introduction: Leadership at a Global Threshold. Leadership in the 21st century operates under unprecedented conditions of complexity, acceleration, and interdependence. Political instability, organizational burnout, technological disruption, and widening social inequities have exposed the limitations of leadership models that prioritize visibility, speed, and persuasion over regulation, accountability, and care. Across sectors, leadership failures increasingly manifest not only as inefficiency, but as ethical breakdowns, erosions of trust, normalization of coercion, and systemic harm. This chapter proceeds from the premise that the core crisis of contemporary leadership is not a deficit of intelligence or innovation, but a deficit of regulated ethical capacity. Leaders are routinely required to act under pressure while embedded in incentive structures that reward dominance and decisiveness rather than reflection and restraint. Under such conditions, even well-intentioned leadership may devolve into moral disengagement, boundary violations, and lawful instability. Quiet excellence is introduced as a response to this condition, a framework that recenters leadership on internal coherence, ethical containment, and legal alignment prior to the exercise of power. To orient the reader from the outset, quiet excellence is provisionally summarized through the following meta-model, which structures the chapter and the book as a whole. Quiet excellence equals presence plus holistic healing, lawful boundaries, nonviolence. This model foregrounds the interaction of embodied regulation, trauma integration, and legal accountability as the necessary conditions for ethical leadership. 1.2, the limits of performative and coercive leadership. Dominant leadership paradigms in both Western and global contexts frequently valorize charisma, decisiveness, and disruption. While such traits may yield short-term results, their elevation to normative ideals has contributed to cultures of performativity and coercion. Performative leadership privileges appearance over substance and action over deliberation, while coercive leadership, whether overt or subtle, relies on asymmetries of power to compel compliance rather than earn consent. Research in organizational psychology, public administration, and leadership ethics consistently demonstrates that these models are associated with burnout, ethical drift, and institutional fragility. When outcomes are prioritized without sufficient attention to process, legality, and consent, ethical containment erodes. Over time, this erosion normalizes aggression, suppresses dissent, and increases the risk of interpersonal and structural violence. Quiet excellence reframes the evaluative criteria of leadership. Rather than measuring effectiveness primarily through influence or results, it emphasizes the leader's capacity to avoid harm while exercising authority. This shift from dominance to stewardship constitutes a foundational ethical reorientation. 1.3 Defining quiet excellence: conceptual and operational precision. Quiet excellence is defined as the capacity of a leader to maintain psychological regulation, somatic stability, moral clarity, and legal alignment while exercising authority or influence. Each element of this definition serves a distinct analytical function. Psychological regulation refers to the ability to manage effective arousal under stress. Somatic stability highlights the embodied nature of ethical agency. Moral clarity denotes coherence between values, judgment, and action. Legal alignment ensures accountability to shared civic standards rather than personal discretion. The term quiet denotes disciplined non-reactivity rather than passivity. It reflects the capacity to pause, listen, and restrain action when immediate intervention would escalate harm. Excellence refers not to exceptional performance, but to reliability and consistency in ethical conduct across contexts and over time. To support empirical engagement, quiet excellence can be operationalized through observable markers, including regulated responses during conflict, respect for consent and autonomy, adherence to due process, transparency in decision-making, and avoidance of manipulative or coercive tactics. These markers enable the framework to be studied, assessed, and critiqued within scholarly and applied settings. 1.4 Trauma-Informed Neuroscience and Ethical Capacity. A defining contribution of quiet excellence is its grounding in trauma-informed neuroscience. Research in effective neuroscience demonstrates that moral reasoning, impulse control, and empathic accuracy are profoundly influenced by physiological state. Under chronic stress or unresolved trauma, the nervous system prioritizes survival responses that narrow ethical perception and increase reactivity. Leaders operating in dysregulated states are more likely to engage in binary thinking, threat inflation, and impulsive decision-making. These patterns elevate the risk of coercion and boundary violations, even in the absence of malicious intent. Quiet excellence therefore treats nervous system regulation as a foundational leadership competency rather than a therapeutic concern. It is important to distinguish this framework from clinical or therapeutic models of healing. Quiet excellence does not seek to treat trauma, but to acknowledge its ethical implications for leadership. Regulation is framed here as a civic and organizational responsibility, an enabling condition for lawful, nonviolent authority. 1.5 Silence, restraint, and the ethics of non-action. Within many leadership cultures, silence is interpreted as weakness or indecision. Quiet excellence challenges this assumption by reframing silence as a potential form of ethical communication. Intentional silence, grounded in regulation and respect for lawful process, can prevent escalation, invite participation, and preserve relational safety. Crucially, ethical silence must be distinguished from complicity. Quiet excellence does not endorse silence in the presence of injustice, abuse, or imminent harm. Rather, it emphasizes timely, bounded, and lawful restraint as an ethical counterweight to impulsive action. In high-stakes organizational or legal contexts, restraint may protect due process, safeguard dignity, and prevent the misuse of power. This distinction clarifies the ethical limits of non-action and reinforces the accountability embedded within quiet excellence. 1.6 Lawful boundaries and legitimate authority. Quiet excellence integrates leadership ethics explicitly with law. Ethical leadership cannot rely solely on personal virtue. It must be anchored in legal frameworks that define rights, boundaries, and mechanisms of accountability. Law functions not as an external constraint, but as an ethical infrastructure that protects against the concentration and abuse of power. Leaders who bypass legal processes in the name of efficiency, benevolence, or innovation often undermine the very values they claim to advance. Quiet excellence insists that legitimate authority must remain legible within democratic, human rights-aligned legal systems. Lawful boundaries thus serve as both ethical safeguards and sources of public trust, particularly in contexts of vulnerability and asymmetrical power. 1.7 Quiet excellence in global and cultural contexts. While quiet excellence is grounded in universal ethical principles such as dignity, consent, and nonviolence, its expression is necessarily shaped by cultural and legal context. Leadership norms vary significantly across societies, particularly between individualist and collectivist cultures, and between common law and civil law systems. Quiet excellence is designed to be adaptable rather than prescriptive. Its emphasis on regulation, lawful restraint, and harm prevention allows it to align with diverse cultural interpretations of authority while maintaining ethical coherence. This adaptability strengthens the framework's relevance for global leadership and cross-cultural governance. 1.8 Scholarly and civic implications. Quiet excellence is framed not as a personal achievement, but as a civic practice. Leaders who cultivate quiet excellence contribute to violence prevention, institutional legitimacy, and social trust. By aligning internal discipline with external accountability, the framework bridges personal ethics and collective governance. From a scholarly perspective, quiet excellence invites interdisciplinary engagement across leadership studies, neuroscience, ethics, law, and emerging technologies. It provides a robust conceptual language for examining how embodied regulation shapes the ethical exercise of power in complex systems. 1.9 Conclusion. This chapter has articulated quiet excellence as a foundational framework for ethical leadership grounded in regulation, restraint, and legality. By reframing leadership as an embodied, lawful, and nonviolent practice, quiet excellence offers a pathway towards sustainable authority and genuine human flourishing. Subsequent chapters deepen this foundation by examining holistic healing and presence as operational dimensions of quiet excellence across real-world contexts.